Okunola-Global, a final year student studying information science and media studies. Taslim, please could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi everyone, my name is Taslim. I do strategy and operations at Google, based out of San Francisco. Good to be here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's good to have you here. So let's go straight into the questions. Hi everyone, welcome to the PAU Insights Podcast. And today we're going to be talking to Taslim Okunola about data-driven marketing, using analytics to make informed decisions. I'm your host, Okunola-Global, a final year student studying information science and media studies. Taslim, please could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi everyone, my name is Taslim. I do strategy and operations at Google, based out of San Francisco. Good to be here.
Okay, thank you. Hi everyone, welcome to the PAU Insights Podcast. And today we're going to be talking to Taslim Okunola about data-driven marketing, using analytics to make informed decisions. I'm your host, Okunola-Global, a final year student studying information science and media studies. Taslim, please could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi everyone, my name is Taslim. I do strategy and operations at Google, based out of San Francisco. Good to be here.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it's good to have you here. So let's go straight into the questions. How did you begin your journey with Google?
My journey with Google was an interesting one because I joined when I was in school as an intern. I interned in the sales team in Lagos, and that included helping big businesses and brands shape their digital marketing world. And I did that for a few months, went back to school, and then I came back to Google to lead a nonprofit program for Google.org. We ran this competition where we gave out $6 million to 36 nonprofits in Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa. And I sort of program managed that. And then I moved into product marketing. Still based in Lagos. I was focused on our consumer products in Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa, and other countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. That was literally the journey into Google. There were a few roles I've done after that, but that's like the short version of how I got into Google.
So what is your current work now as global strategy and operations entail?
Right now I do marketing strategy and operations for our subscriptions marketing business. And startups, it's a really interesting kind of role because it's what we do is we support business leaders, in my case marketing leaders, to run a tight ship, to run their businesses efficiently. And this I typically would say we're like in-house consulting for the marketing teams. So think about your McKinsey, Accenture, etc. But if we're only working for one client, and so that allows us to go very deep into the scope of work that we do, and that's basically what I do as strategy and operations at Google.
Okay. So I imagine you're dealing with a lot of information at one time for your different clients. And how do you know what to tune out and what to focus on with regards to analytics?
With regards to analytics, okay. The question started very differently. With regards to analytics, okay, there's usually a lot of data and a lot of information, especially if you're working on a product at scale. But one of the things that get me grounded is two things. When you focus on the users and you also keep the business metrics in mind, you can go a million ways, but you always hit and come back to your goal, your main goal. right? And yes, there is a lot of information, there's a lot of data, there are different touch points, especially with digital, where you can really know your users. But that also means that there are a lot of vanity metrics. It's easy to fall into the trap of trying to measure what doesn't matter. So in a way to get yourself grounded on what really matters, you have to focus on the user and the business metrics. And the way I typically do it is think through a funnel. You know, what's your user goal? For example, the product user goal might be daily active users, which is basically what most people in tech use to show how sticky their product is. If I can get someone to come back every day, the product is useful for them. So for the users, for the focus on the user, most people focus on DAU. And for business metrics, those are straightforward: revenue, ROI. And when you look at those things, when you focus on those things, you can then build a funnel into it, which is like what leads to a daily active user, right? If you're building a social media product, for instance, and I'm making this example so that it's more concrete, and I'm just talking in abstract, right? If you're making a social media product, for instance, and I'm gonna try to stay away from Google examples, by the way. So it's still gonna be a little bit abstract, but I'm trying to make it a little bit concrete as well. If you're making a social media product, for instance, and daily active users, your North Star, like that's how you're focusing on your user. Of course, there are many touch points. There are likes, there are comments, there are shares. There is even like latency. You can then build a funnel into like, how does the user become a daily active user? What's the user journey from like sign up page to coming back every day? And that's how you then start to focus on what really matters in terms of information or data. Because yes, you have 1 million data points, but if the data point doesn't fit into that funnel of how you go from someone that doesn't know about you at all, to hearing about you for the first time, to coming every day, then if the data doesn't fit into that funnel, you know that you don't need to focus on those data points. So that's how you sort of like streamline the kind of information you focus on. And the same thing with revenue. You can also build a funnel into like, okay, if someone sign ups, if someone does the activity, how do they lead to revenue for us? And so I think all in all, it comes back to like focusing on those two things: what makes sense for the business and what makes sense for the business.
So working in marketing now, what's one piece of marketing advice that you think you've seen people take for granted? So it could be something very basic, but like, what's one piece of advice that you've seen people really either misunderstand or just not,
I think one of the it's very simple advice that's it's been around for so long, but I think people still take for granted is content is king. I think it's easy to, and the reason why people take it for granted is that when you invest in content, you don't get returns immediately. It's very delayed, but then the ripple effect and the subsequent gains are usually very high when you do like early investment in content, and I don't think a lot of people estimate that properly, and so content is king. It's so simple, and it's that notion where it's like, how do you provide value to users without necessarily drawing them to your products at the first touch point, right? An example would be if you have a hotel booking platform, for instance, and how do you create content in such a way that you cater to people that are traveling, people that are looking for passport information, visa information, and those things don't really, like, if you're looking at it, those things don't really lead to immediate revenue, right? If I'm looking for passport information and a hotel booking website shows me information about it, they will have a blog post about it, or a content type of content about it, I won't necessarily buy from them immediately. But like, think about it. They've sort of like they've seeded that their brand in my subconscious, my conscious, and when I'm ready to book a hotel, after getting my passport renewed or getting the visa for the place I'm going to, I could, come back to them. Now, the reason why most people don't really pay attention to that is, one, when you invest in content, you don't see immediate returns. So that kind of example that I spoke about, it's possible that I'm not even going to the city like this year. I just want to get my passport renewed for now, and maybe it's next year when I'm traveling to that city, I then go to the hotel booking platform. So they've invested in the content. I have used the content, but they've not gotten the gains from it. So there's no usually immediate returns in that case. And I think that's one of the reasons people don't invest in it, because they can't see the returns immediately. The second reason is that people are also very focused on short-term wins, right? And for instance, when you're building a marketing strategy for a leader, if the leader is like if the leader is incentivizing you, shipping clicks, getting dollars immediately, it will be hard for you to make a case for content, right?
Yeah.
And there are also like other examples of why I feel like people don't really pay attention to it, but I think that they should, because it's various kind of content. You can do video, you can do text, and I think it also allows you to leverage other platforms to drive traffic to your business, right? So if you have video content, for instance, you can have a whole Instagram content or TikTok content strategy where you're pushing out content on TikTok. People are tired of regular brand content. So if you come with something that's more natural, something that's more helpful, they get drawn in from there. And at some point, they get to use your product. They tell your friends about your product, and you start to grow your DAUs and your user base like that. So yeah, I think that's one of the marketing advice that's been very underrated.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. So for the next question, how do you make sure you're collecting the right data for decision making in the first place?
Yeah, so I think this is, I'm going to go back to what I said 2 questions back, which is users' business metrics. I think that it's incredibly hard. It sounds simple that, okay, if I just focus on the user business, of course, everything is sorted. It sounds simple, but it's incredibly hard to figure out the right set of data to use for decision making, or the right set of data to focus on. And I think this then goes into even digging deeper into the why of the product, right? Yeah. And I've been talking a lot about the product now, and this is a marketing conversation, right? I think they're actually intertwined, and I think most people feel like product is a different thing and marketing is a different thing. But I feel like they have a very symbiotic relationship. They have to go hand in hand, because if you don't really understand the core of the product you're marketing, it's really hard to market it, right? So I feel like in determining the right data set to focus on to make the good decisions, you need to really dig deeper into the understanding the why of the product, and then using that to even get a better understanding of the user base, right? And then you focus on the users. Once you focus on the users, you're able to come up with the right metrics to target to drive those success there. And then when you also focus on the business, it's a 2-pronged approach. When you focus on the business, you're able to get to the right metrics to support that. So it's like, you start from that base. What does it mean? I made an example of DAU. For some people, they have more deeper retention metrics for how they focus on the user. It doesn't have to be daily active users. It could be like a 3-month retention rate or a 6-month retention rate, right? It could be, for some people, it could even be like a little bit higher level metric, like a monthly active user. Like if it's a product that doesn't require daily use, your monthly active user could be your North Star, not your daily active user, And so you have to like figure out what that North Star is, and then what data will lead to that. So again, going back to that funnel, you have to build a funnel. How do we get to the daily active user? How do we get to the revenue? And then you use that to figure out what data points to focus on for your decision making. Because at the end of the day, it also depends on what decision you want to make, right? So are we trying to expand the product? And again, I'm trying to give examples so it's more concrete. Are we trying to expand the product to an international market, right? Or are we trying to expand the product to more types of users? So maybe we have a product that's been focused on mothers, and we feel like, we want to also we have something that we can also do with fathers. So we're trying to break into a new segment of the market, or we're trying to even expand into different territories or different markets entirely. And then you go back to those things, right? So which data points can help us realize how to move the daily active user, which is a North Star, and how to move revenue. And once you go back to that, you can then start to see the kind of data points you should focus on to make that decision. So yeah, I think all in all, to conclude, you have to understand the why for your product. You have to understand the decision you're trying to make, what's the question you're trying to answer, and then bring your funnel, which is like you focus on the users, focus on business metrics. You have a funnel that leads to your North Star metrics in those two areas. And then you combine all those things together. To get to a point where you have the right data set for your decision.
Okay. So with marketing, like you spend a lot of time trying to convince users to do something. You're trying to get people to take an action. So there's like a human element to that connection you're trying to make. So do you find yourself having to balance your creative instincts with facing the facts? And how do you deal with this? This is something new.
I think I would sort of rephrase that to be more intuition versus data, because I mean, you could say that certain things are also facts, even if they're not data backed. So it's more of intuition versus data, and I think that this is what makes marketing an art versus science. You know, it's not like marketing is not a long line of if-else statements, right?
Yeah.
If this, then that, else that. You know, it involves humans, like you said. Yes, you can do everything right. You can have the right content in place, the right campaign in place, and it just doesn't land as much as it should. And that's where intuition comes in. You know, I feel like it's an art. It's a merry mix between intuition and data. Like you can't do one too much. you have to always bring. And I think that's why you're not giving your marketing to AI. That's why you're giving your marketing to humans. So they can make use of that intuition. And I think that intuition is honed over time. You know, it's like it comes with reps and experience, and you're able to know what your gut is saying with respect to a particular question. So to answer your question, I think there are times when we have to use intuition over data, or we have to mix them. I think most times we mix both. You know, you have you're grounded in your data, but then you're able to make some expert guess around, like, okay, this is what I think is right in the face of this data, right? And I think it really depends on the kind of decisions, right? For creative decisions, for instance, you know, when you're talking about marketing, there are different elements to it, right?
Yeah.
It's not just running campaigns, or it's not just pushing out ads out there to social media or to search engines. It's like also there's a lot of creative process to even building out assets for those campaigns, you know. And in those kind of situations, for instance, you have to rely a lot on intuition, and that's why a lot of brands sometimes get it wrong. I don't know if you're aware of, if you're familiar with the iPad ad that Apple released. And
yeah, the one that they crushed a bunch of things. Yeah.
There is no way you can find data for that. There's no way. You've got to have a little bit of intuition, and there has to be someone that makes a decision that, okay, this is the right direction, right? And that is it. Sometimes you get it wrong. And that is usually like how like marketing works. Is you have to use a mix of intuition and data. Of course, when you're running a direct response campaign, when you're running an ad on social media or search engine, you have to do more data than intuition, because that is like very systematic. If you put this much dollars in this kind of assets, you get this amount of clicks or impressions, and then you can tweak it, you can optimize it. That is more data than intuition. But then there's other parts of marketing as well where it's a little bit more intuition than data. I think the right way to think about it is that marketing is an art. You have to always have a mix of intuition and data. It's not just data, or intuition. It's a mix of both. And I think it's in finding the balance. That's what's important. And it's the mix, the way you mix it up is different with respect to what kind of decision you're trying to make. If you're trying to make a creative decision, it might be more intuition than data. If you're trying to make a performance or efficiency-driven decision, it might be more data than intuition. I think you're muted.
Thank you. So I want us to just talk about that ad very briefly, the Apple ad. What kind of conversations do you think they would have had internally that would lead to them deciding to take that ad off the air? Because I imagine that ad isn't released in isolation, like it's part of a broader campaign, and there are things that specific ad was meant to do. So if something happens like to your team or something, what kind of conversations are you having to say, okay, yeah, we should definitely take this off and re-strategize?
I think when those kind of things happens, you create a war room. You kind of bring the right people into the room, trying to brainstorm what the hell went wrong, and how do we so in engineering they do something called post-mortem, and I think that marketers and every other role also have a similar thing, even if they don't call it post-mortem. It's pretty much the doc where you start to write what went wrong. So you don't just yank it off the air. You have to first try to understand, where did we go wrong? And this also could go into like even, looking at your process. Looking at your process, how you got there. What went wrong? There also, in this kind of scenarios, not everything went wrong. I know to the outside, people feel like, oh, this is all bad, and that's why they put it off. But when it comes to the back end, the team working on this also have to acknowledge what went right. So there is a mix of what went wrong and what went right. And this is also usually a cross-functional effort. So it's not just marketing. It's also PR in the room, a lot of execs in the room. You're trying to figure out what's the appropriate response here. Because the people that are actually front of line for this kind of things in PR, not marketing. I don't know if people understand that marketing and PR, marketing and comms, are very different fields. So yes, it was a marketing fail, obviously, but it's not the CMO that will come out and start to repair the public trust. It's PR that will come out and try to fix it. And sometimes they don't even do it directly. Sometimes they go through like the leads. They'll be like, okay, maybe the CEO should write a blog post about this, or maybe the head of marketing should write a blog post about it. Let's craft the blog post. These are the things that we need to address. But you need to first start with what went wrong, what went right. And then you don't start scenario planning. Scenario planning is, these are the different steps we could take. And this is the expected outcome we feel like these different steps would give us. So there will always be that scenario of, okay, let's do nothing. What will be the impact of that? What are the pros and cons of that? Let's remove it. What are the pros and cons of that? Like you said, how does it even affect our broader campaign plan? Because we wanted to release this product. This is just one element of a carefully orchestrated marketing launch.
Yeah.
If that element is removed, what are the ripple consequences on the other elements of how marketing launch, right? So you do scenario planning, you debate, and this is also why some of intuition and data comes in, right? Some people might have data as to like, okay, if we do this is our estimated impact. This is estimated impact on our business. If we go this other route, this is estimated impact on our business. And the intuition of like, this is what seems right to do, right? So yes, maybe there will be a short dip in the business, but there's a longer term gain somewhere, you know? So that's usually how those conversations go, where you start with a post-mortem of understanding what went wrong, some of the things that also went well. And then you start with scenario, you go ahead with scenario planning to understand what to do. And then you have to identify a decision maker, you know, but this kind of staff, it could be the head of marketing, it could be the CEO, depends on how big it is, you know. And the decision maker has to pick a scenario, and once it's picked and aligned on, you execute it. So yeah, it would have been a very hard decision to make, but it was one they had to make.
Thank you very much for that answer. I think it's really interesting that getting the curtain of what would happen in situations like that. And I just want to remind the audience that you can leave your questions for Mr. Taslim in the comments, and I would ask him. So you spoke very briefly about AI when you answered the question about intuition versus data. And AI is something that's affecting every space now. Education, healthcare, defense, marketing. So how do you see affecting your space now? And based on some of your blog posts, I know you're kind of an ally for AI-led solutions and things like that. So how do you see changing the space that you operate in right now? And do you think people should be embracing it, or do you think it's something people should be scared of?
Well, you mentioned I'm biased to AI, so I will lead with a bias. I think people should be embracing it. I think that it's I saw one ad on Twitter the other day where someone said AI would not take your job. It's the person using AI that will take your job. Because I feel like the optimum situation is a mix of human and AI. There are some roles you can automate as a result of AI, but I don't think most roles you can automate, at least with the technology today. So it feels like it's like every adaptation of technology, just like when the computers came as well, and some people were like used to their typewriter or used to doing pen and paper, and they're like, I don't know, I can use that thing. Then another set of people adopted a computer and flew with it. And now it is really impossible to see a workplace without a computer today. That was not the case in like 1990 prior, you know? So I feel like it's the same as every evolution of tech, where the early adopters get an edge. And at the end of the day, it gets to a point where it doesn't make sense not to adopt it. So it's not a matter of if we should adopt it. It's a matter of when.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't think there's ever a question of whether or not AI will be used in the workplace. It will at some point. So it's more of a question of, do you want to be the early adopters, where you're part of the first wave of people that's able to use this to improve your work and your productivity? Or do you want to wait till when you're forced? And at that point, it might be too late.
Yeah.
There'll be a lot more people that have the AI skills that have been able to use AI in their work. I think you'll start to see JDs in the future, job descriptions in the future include familiarity with AI. Just like now we have some job descriptions that will say, familiarity with Microsoft Office and Google Docs and Figma and etc. AI will start to be that. And you don't want to be pushed to that corner before you start taking advantage of technology. So I think, again, I'm biased, but I think everyone should seek to adopt artificial intelligence in their workflow. Now, the how you adopt it is a different question. I think that when AI started, maybe a lot of people thought that you just automate your work. You just give it some prompts, it ships something to you, and you just submit that as your work. I don't think that is the right way. I think there is still a little bit of human creativity that should be included. And the best case scenario is where you get your first draft from an AI tool and you make that draft as amazing as possible. And I'll give you an example. Again, trying to be concrete, but also not trying to be too concrete. An example is recently, about last month, actually, mid last month, there was an event that happened, and I had to, part of my work, like as strategy and operations, is doing sometimes analysis, and competitive analysis, understanding, okay, what's happening in the industry, right? And sometimes you have maybe you have an event in the form of whether it's an announcement, whether it's an actual event, whether it's a scandal, whether it's anything. You have, let's call that an event. You have an event that happens that you need to analyze, you need to sit with, and then figure out what's the impact on your company's strategy, right? If this is happening in our space to a competitor, what should we be thinking about on our end? And that's one of the work we do at SNO. Is that those kind of analysis. And sometimes your analysis is not time bound, because maybe if we're trying to expand into a new market, for instance, right now, that analysis is not time bound, right? But we're trying to respond to a specific event, whether it's an announcement, whether it's an actual event, whether it's a news cycle, it is time bound. If you don't do your analysis like that same day the event broke, it might be too late. And usually these things would take me like hours, to comb through news articles, blog posts, YouTube videos, try to put together a POV and all of that. Do you know I used Gemini 1.5 Pro, the one that has a long context window, and I got a draft out in 30 minutes. Now, it was a very shitty draft, of course, but I got it in 30 minutes because I just put all the regular materials that I would review, put all of them into Gemini 1.5 Pro, because it has a very long context window, like 1 million tokens context window, and it was able to synthesize it. I gave it a prompt, like, oh, you're the SNO, you're the strategy and operations manager for this product. This is what's happening. I give a POV in this manner. Again, prompt engineering, that's another conversation. Give it a prompt, it gave me a draft. And then I made a few tweaks. Within 30 minutes, I had a shareable draft that I shared with my stakeholders. Now, I still continue to work on that doc for another 3 days before it got to its final version. In fact, there were some things that I needed to remove and add net new things. Like, by the time it got to the final version, I think it was like 3-4 days it took me. But the difference is I got a shareable draft in 30 minutes. A shareable draft in 30 minutes. So if I had said, oh, I don't want to use AI, and I want to be very hostile to this technology, I don't want to use it, I'll probably be able to get a shareable draft by the end of the day or early the next day. And maybe it's not too late, but how am I really responding in real time to the events that's happened? So it made me better at my job, So that's one example of like how you can use AI in a way where it complements you, complements you, and it makes you get better at your job, basically. And I think that's the best way to do it is that mix versus trying to think that you get a finished product from AI, because you'll be disappointed. You're thinking of getting a finished product in one go.
So because of the nature of the course I study, that's information science and media studies, it kind of mixes, science and media. So I definitely get like the use of AI for the more, let me say, procedural things, where maybe I want to summarize a document, or I want to extract key points or something. But when it comes to things like image generation, the more creative sides where the AI is actually, making creative work, that's where I have reservations, because there are conversations about, the intellectual property of the output, things like the training data, whether I had permission to use some of the artists' work. But I think if those things can be sorted out, like, it's definitely going to be a game changer, even in the creative space. So let's talk a bit about first principles thinking, because I think it's something everyone should know. And I remember seeing you had a blog post about it. So can you first tell us what it is, and then give us an example of a scenario where you used it and how it worked for you?
So first principle thinking, I think I saw this in one, I can't remember the blog post I saw it in, but it's basically the art of breaking questions down to like the atoms and solving like the basics, the foundation, starting from the foundation. And one famous example, because Elon, even though I do not agree with a lot of the things he does, he's a big proponent of first principles thinking, and I would use it's one of his companies to explain it. It's when he was building Tesla, or like when they were building Tesla, one of the things they did was actually going back to the basics. If you think about the industries we're in, a lot of things have already been set. A lot of rules have been set, and these are like very sometimes unspoken rules. No one really understands them, but people go along with them. And some of them are not like, they're not legal. These are not legal rules. Of course, you can't do anything illegal, but these are like unspoken rules as to like why we do things. Now, if Elon was not doing first principle thinking, or if, let me not even use Elon because I don't agree with him. Let me use Tesla. If Tesla, different, separate the art from the artist, right?
Exactly.
If Tesla was not using first principles thinking, what they would have been thinking about is, how do we make the existing car, which is like a gas car, electric? But because we're using first principles thinking, they decided to break down a lot of things. Like, why do we have the engine in front? If this thing doesn't have an engine, can we not make the space in front for people to put something inside? Why? There were so many questions as to like, why were cars built a certain way? And even this new thing they're doing with steer-by-wire, I know they're not the first person to do it, but like, it's also a question of like, why were we steering with actuator before? And it was because of the technology that existed before. And now they feel like with electric technology, we could just steer by wire. And I think that's one of those things where if you don't go deep into those questions of why are we doing this? Why is this done this way? It's easy to just build on top of existing principles. But what happens when you build on top of existing principles is when something goes wrong, it's hard for you to know where or easily fix it. Because you've built on top of all these principles you don't really understand. And that's why it's good to go back to first principles. It's like questioning all the different principles that make what you're trying to, decision you're trying to make. And then when you question everything, there are certain areas where you could change to actually improve dramatically what you're trying to build or what you're trying to, decision you're trying to make.
I think, sorry, you go on.
Oh, no, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think it has to do, like, it goes hand in hand with innovation. It goes hand in hand with critical thinking. You're trying to figure out why it is things are a certain way and not just accepting the status quo.
Yep.
And if you're listening to this and you find the idea of first principles thinking interesting, you can do a bit more research into the concept of mental models and how they affect your thinking. Yeah, so this podcast has students as part of the target audience.
Yeah.
So if there's a student that wants to follow your path and work with Google's marketing team, what would you advise them to do?
What would I advise them to do if they want to work with Google marketing teams? Apply on the career sites. I think that I don't really have a ton of advice right now for job seekers, and the reason is because of there's so many things that we thought we knew to be true that are no longer true because of how the market is. The job market is very, 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 very critical right now. But I think that there's still like certain things that it's like bare minimum you have to do. So I can't speak to those things, but it's not going to be new information to anyone, basically. So I think that as students, one of the things you want to do is try to get as much experience as possible. I know it's good to, like, learning is great. Like, you have all these degrees, etc. But if you don't have practical experience in the industry, it's usually really hard to make a case for anyone to hire you. And I think getting as much experience as possible through internships, if you can, it's usually good. I think the other thing is you have to think through the process of getting a job. It's like drawing your own personal customer journey map. It's like, how do I get to getting a job, right? And the best place, I used to say, the best place to start is from the end. You know, you can even go as far as saying, what kind of job do I want to get? If you're trying to get a marketing job at Google, go to careers.google.com. There are different types of marketing at Google. So trying to get a marketing job at Google is not enough. Look at the specific kind of marketing you want to do. Is it brand marketing? Is it product marketing? You know, and then look for a job description for that role. And then ask yourself, what do I need to do to get here? You know, so if you look at the job description, start from the job description, right? This is what it requires to be this kind of marketer at Google. Then compare that to what you have. Am I there yet? If you're there, of course, go ahead to apply. If you're not there yet, then you make a plan to how to get there, whether it's by getting the right level of experience, whether it's by upskilling yourself to get the right level of skills. And you can even go even beyond that again and look at a few more companies. You know, Google is not the only company in the world, right? Look at other companies that you're interested in and go to their career page. Look at the kind of marketing job you want to do. Look at the job description. You can collect like 10, 20 job descriptions. I mean, in the past, I would say just focus on 3, but with AI, you can collect like 100 job descriptions and synthesize them with AI and figure out, like, with what I have right now. In fact, I think AI is so good right now that you can even upload your CV and say, how can I get to this point? Create a learning plan for me. Create an experience plan for me. So it's basically understanding how to get there and then working your way towards there. I think that's one of the best ways to set yourself up for success with your dream role. Because I know people do have dream jobs. And just start from there and then work your way towards it.
And what skills would you say are important for someone that wants to excel in marketing?
Depends on the kind of marketing. But I think overall, this is my personal perspective, and I don't think it's like I think definitely for specific hard skills, the job description route is a good one for the kind of marketing.
Yeah.
Just go to the kind of marketing you want, look at the job description, and figure out the hard skills from there. But personally, I feel like you should know your product. And by knowing your product is understanding the industry you want to be in. If you're going to be in the tech industry, because there's also like consumer CPG marketing, you know. If you're going to be in the tech industry, you have to understand how tech products work. Because, I mean, I know some people will tell you can probably market a product you don't understand. I don't know how they do that. So I'd say this is my own personal advice, not something that will get you in the door. I think for me, I think you should know your product. Know your product. Know what know everything about that industry that you can know. If you're trying to like be a tech product marketing person, there is no different industries within tech. Are you thinking B2B marketing or B2C marketing? Are you thinking SaaS marketing or consumer product marketing? You know, and within those elements, what kind of product? If you're thinking SaaS, for instance, you need to understand how subscriptions work. Like you need to read subscriptions because SaaS is software as a service. It's usually like subscription based.
Yeah.
You need to know how subscription works. Like what does renewal rate means? What does churn rate means? You know, what is ARR? What is MRR? You know, how does pricing work? Like it's easy for you to feel like marketing is the only thing you need. But I feel like marketing skills are very important, yes, but you also need to like stay close to the industry you want to work in. So that's my personal advice. And the second piece, of course, because we're in a data-driven conversation, right, is data. It's always good to understand how data works. Of course, you don't need to write SQL or be very deep in it, but just even understanding how to get the right amount, the right level of data that you need to make the right level of decision is important. And I think some people call it analytical thinking. I think it's very important. Very important for you to be able to see a question. It's a business question you have to answer. Figure out what data do you need to answer it, and how do you get the data. So it's not like I'm not saying you should go and be a data scientist or go and learn how program in Python and all of that. No. I'm saying have a little bit of analytical thinking. Have a little bit of understanding about how data works. Because it's very important. It's easy as marketers to lose sight of data and say, oh, I just want to do the shiny thing. But then it bites you down the line if your marketing initiatives are not driving business goals. And there's a saying, I've forgotten who said this, you can't improve what you don't measure. So if you don't know about data, if you don't know about measuring these things, you can't really improve it.
So if you're someone that's listening to this, I just want to remind you that here at Pan Atlantic University, we run master's programs in data science. So if you'd like to get more information about that, you can check out the website pau.edu.ng. So finally, are there any specific courses, books, or resources that you would recommend that have brought you to where you are now?
I should not say this publicly, but I don't really read. I'm trying. I'm getting there. I think I realized I learned more using audio. So I do audiobooks and I do podcasts a lot. I'm a very big podcast person.
Okay.
But I also don't really listen to a lot of marketing podcasts. So I don't have
What kind of podcasts do you listen to?
Okay.
If you don't mind sharing.
I don't mind sharing. I'm very big about my podcast. So I listen to the podcasts I listen to get updates for things that are happening. So I listen to the daily podcast from New York Times.
Okay.
But also there's also like updates about tech happenings. So I listen to Hard Fork. Hard Fork by Casey Newton and Kevin Roos. I also listen to the Vergecast. So Verge is also like a tech, what's happening in tech kind of podcast. So I do those. But I also listen to like business strategy oriented podcasts. And my favorite of that is Acquired. Acquired is like a mini audiobook Their podcasts are usually like 4 hours long. So it takes me multiple days to get through it.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it because they tell you a story about a business or a product, and they do their research. In fact, they interview some of the key people in the product. They did Microsoft some weeks ago, and they were even able to get Steve Ballmer to talk to them.
Oh.
And they tell you the story of how it came to be from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then at the end of the podcast, they do like a analysis to say, okay, what were the things that made this business or product successful? And I find that very fascinating. So it's actually one of my very, very favorite podcasts acquired. Yeah. And I also listen to there's also one podcast I listen to because sometimes I'm just interested in random things for some reason. Like very random things. It's called it's a Quartz Obsession. They have a newsletter as well. And I was listening to their I was reading their newsletter, and then they got a podcast and I started watching their podcast. So they just tell you about mundane things. Sometimes there was a time about treadmills. Basically, how did treadmills become a thing? And yeah, so I just sometimes enjoy learning random things. Yeah, but I have some book recommendations from people I've heard. I've not read any of these books, but they come highly recommended from great marketers. So there are 3 of them. One is Unpublished by David Ogilvy. And then there is Contagious by Jonah Berger. And then there is Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. So those are the 3 recommendations I have.
Thank you very much for your time, and to the audience, thank you for listening to us. It's been a very insightful conversation on data-driven marketing and everything around that.